Okay, so you're here because you want to get smarter faster, right?
Yeah.
You want knowledge that actually sinks in, but without, drowning in information.
Exactly. And the stuff you sent over, particularly Kiyosaki's Who Stole My Pension, really digs into that feeling about retirement savings. Like, is it all smoke and mirrors?
Yeah, it feels like you want to cut through the noise.
Hmm.
So our mission today, let's pull out the absolute core insights from Kiyosaki's viewpoint. It's often critical, even controversial, but it's about the systems managing our financial future.
Definitely. He covers a lot of ground. We're talking big picture stuff like central banks versus, say, central planning, but also the nitty gritty. What pension managers actually experience, transparency or the lack of it.
Investment strategies too, right? Including some riskier ones.
Oh, yeah. Alternative investments, fees, which are huge, and just the broader economy. It all ties together in his view.
Okay, so to really get where he's coming from, his background seems key. Uganda as a teenager. That's different.
Yeah. It really is. His dad was there studying gerontology, how different cultures handle aging. But then the really heavy part, his father disappeared.
Disappeared.
Yeah. Believed, captured, maybe killed, possibly doing intelligence work, experiencing that kind of, well, hidden political reality young. It must leave a mark.
I can only imagine. And then skipping the end of high school for early college,
Mm-hmm.
that points to someone who doesn't necessarily follow the prescribed path.
Absolutely. An independent streak, for sure. And then Vietnam happened.
Another major turning point, it sounds like.
He called it a massive eye-opener. He saw this huge gap between, the official story about the war and what was actually happening.
Like what?
Well, for instance, he'd believed the government policy was not to send siblings into combat together. Then he found out that wasn't always true. Things like that really shook his trust in the official narrative in government pronouncements.
You can see how that skepticism might carry over into finance later on. Which brings us to the poor dad idea. That's his actual father, yeah.
Correct. His biological dad, highly educated, believed strongly in the standard advice, good school, secure job, pension, got degrees from places like Stanford, Chicago.
So the model citizen, basically.
You'd think. But then he ran for office, lieutenant governor in Hawaii on an anti-corruption ticket, apparently ruffled feathers, wrote a book about it.
Sunny skies, shady characters.
That's the one. And after that, he lost his job, and then the pension he'd counted on, it wasn't the rock-solid guarantee he thought it was. That security blanket just dissolved.
Wow. That really drives home the contrast with the rich dad philosophy, doesn't it? That relying only on a job and pension can be fragile.
Totally. His poor dad's story showed him that education alone wasn't enough if you didn't understand how money really works, which led him, years later, to write Rich Dad's Prophecy in 2002.
Where he predicted what exactly?
A big stock market crash, yeah, but also specifically troubles for defined contribution plans, the 401k IRAs that most people rely on now.
And he wasn't just theorizing in a vacuum, right? He pointed to real-world stuff.
Yeah, examples like Croatia cutting pension benefits. Even the Netherlands, which everyone thinks has this amazing system, they were facing pressures too.
It's sobering. And that statistic he uses, the average 401k for someone near retirement being, what, $70,000 or less?
Yeah, it's shockingly low for many. It really highlights a potential massive shortfall. And remember, something like a third of Americans don't even have an employer plan. It paints a grim picture.
Okay, this seems like a good point to bring in. GRUNCH. Gross Universal Cash Heist. That sounds dramatic.
It's definitely a provocative term, but it's Kiyosaki's label for what he sees as systemic manipulation, how money, government, corporations, and especially central banks work together, maybe not always intentionally in concert, but the effect is a subtle siphoning of wealth, a heist you don't even see happening.
So how do central banks fit in? The idea they can create money from nothing.
That's central to his argument. He argues this power gives them enormous, almost unchecked control over economies. He makes this controversial comparison between communist central planning and capitalist central banking.
Suggesting both involve a lot of top-down control.
Kind of, yeah. He even brings up warnings from historical figures like Jefferson and Lincoln about the dangers of powerful banks gaining too much influence over government.
And the money itself being fake, as he calls it. Since Nixon took the dollar off gold in '71, how does that enable this GRUNCH?
Well, when money isn't tied to something tangible like gold, it becomes more abstract, essentially an IOU, a debt instrument. That shift, plus things like the Greenspan put.
The idea the Fed will always bail out the market.
Right, after the '87 crash. And then repealing Glass-Steagall in '99, which let banks take on more risk. All that paved the way for what he and others call shadow banking.
Shadow banking. Sounds a bit cloak and dagger. What is it, really?
Think of it as financial activity happening outside the regular regulated banking system, off-balance sheet stuff. And a big part of it involves the repo market.
Repo market.
Yeah, where assets get used as collateral for short-term loans. But the danger is rehypothecation.
Rehypo.
Rehypothecation. Like, you use your house as collateral for a loan, but then the bank also uses your house as collateral for their borrowing. The same asset gets pledged multiple times over.
Okay, that sounds inherently unstable.
He argues it is, and that this shadow system, not just bad mortgages, was the real powder keg behind the 2008 financial crisis. Pensions got caught up in this too.
How so? How do pensions end up in the shadows?
Because, Kiyosaki says, they're increasingly chasing higher returns by putting money into these complex, high-fee, alternative investments, hedge funds, private equity.
Stuff the average person doesn't really understand.
Exactly. And often with overly optimistic return projections, this is happening even though people like Warren Buffett have warned against it.
Didn't Buffett have that bet about hedge funds?
He did. A $1 million bet that a simple S&P 500 index fund would beat a portfolio of hedge funds over 10 years. And he won, easily. Buffett's also questioned how private equity firms calculate their returns, suggesting it can be, well, misleading.
So if they're risky, expensive, and even Buffett is skeptical, why are pension funds diving in?
This leads to Kiyosaki's concept of the parasite class.
Okay.
He means the entities, mostly Wall Street firms, advisors, consultants, who make a lot of money from the complexity and the fees generated by these alternative investments. They benefit, arguably, at the expense of the pension holders, the host.
And he links this to a lack of financial education.
Yes. He argues the school system doesn't teach us how money really works, and the banking system pushes us to save fake money in fake assets, leaving people vulnerable.
And the lack of transparency you mentioned earlier plays into this.
Big time. Especially with alternative. Confidentiality agreements often mean the actual pension participants, the people whose money it is, can't see the full details of where it's invested or the risks involved.
But the fees are clear, right?
Not always. Edward Seidel, a forensic investigator Kiyosaki cites, often dug into this. He found cases like the Rhode Island state pension where the reported fees were massively understated.
Serious.
Yeah. Seidel found the actual fees paid to Wall Street managers were way higher than disclosed, and meanwhile, performance was lagging. Fees went up, returns went down.
That's concerning. It almost sounds like, well, Kiyosaki makes this comparison to a Ponzi scheme.
It's a strong comparison, but his point is the structural similarity. Relying on new money coming in from current workers to pay obligations to those who are already retired.
Like a treadmill you can't get off.
Sort of. He suggests systems like Social Security, Medicare, even student loan debt have some of these characteristics. He also talks about our default to truth. We tend to assume systems are legitimate, which can blind us to potential problems or even outright wrongdoing.
Okay, so it's a pretty bleak picture he paints.
Yeah.
What's the alternative then? How do we beat the Fed, as he puts it?
His whole message boils down to financial education. Really understanding assets versus liabilities. His definition is simple. Assets put money in your pocket, liabilities take money out.
Not the standard accounting definition, then.
No, it's about cash flow. And he advocates using debt smartly, OPM, other people's money, and understanding his cash flow quadrant.
The ESB, I think.
Right. Employee, self-employed, business owner, investor. He pushes people to focus on the B&I side, building systems and acquiring assets that generate income, rather than just trading time for money as an E or S.
And his board game Cash Flow is supposed to teach this.
Exactly. He believes games are powerful teaching tools. Monopoly got him started, he says. Cash flow aims to teach basic accounting, investing strategy, how to handle debt, kind of simulating how he thinks the wealthy operate.
And those core rich dad lessons come up again and again, don't they?
Oh, yeah. The rich don't work for money. Your house is not an asset, at least not in the income-producing sense. And crucially, savers are losers.
Why are savers losers? Because of inflation and money printing.
Precisely. In a system where the central bank can create money at will, the value of saved cash constantly erodes. He argues you need assets that keep pace or outpace that devaluation. He even talks about aiming for infinite returns, structuring deals, where you make money using little or none of your own capital, just your financial knowledge.
He also makes a pretty scary prediction, doesn't he? About the biggest crash in world history.
He does. It's a stark warning. He speculates it could be triggered by public pensions trying to pull huge amounts of money out of that shadow banking system all at once.
A run on the shadow banks, essentially.
That's the idea. He points to historical currency failures, suggests the US dollar is fundamentally weak because it's not backed by anything tangible, and has already lost most of its purchasing power since '71.
He brings in Buckminster Fuller, too.
Yeah, Fuller's idea of a dark age prison locked by misinformation, like we're trapped by bad ideas. Fuller even questioned the whole concept of needing to earn a living. Kiyosaki touches on things like universal basic income or modern monetary theory.
As potential future scenarios or responses.
Possibly, though he discusses them more as signs of the current system breaking down, I think.
So with all this complexity and potential risk, what's the takeaway for the average person listening? What does Kiyosaki say we should do?
It really comes down to taking ownership. He stresses getting educated about your own pension or retirement plan. Go to the board meetings, ask tough questions, demand transparency. Where is the money really invested? What are the real fees?
Don't just trust the statements you get in the mail.
Exactly. And realize that even supposedly good systems, like the Dutch one he mentions, aren't immune to problems. The core message is financial education is your best protection. Don't be passive.
So basically, navigating retirement today isn't a spectator sport. You can't just set it and forget it.
Not according to Kiyosaki. It demands vigilance, questioning the standard advice, and really committing to lifelong learning about money. Trying to see, as he puts it, all three sides of the coin, what they tell you, what they don't tell you, and the reality.
This has definitely stirred things up. It feels like we've only scratched the surface, but it highlights how much there is to potentially question.
For sure. And the goal here wasn't necessarily to agree with everything Kiyosaki says, but to understand the critique and empower listeners to dig deeper themselves, to think about what actions they might need to take for their future.
Right. So maybe a final thought to leave everyone with. Thinking about everything we've just discussed, all the complexities, the warnings, the alternative views, what's one core belief you hold about retirement or investing that maybe, just maybe, feels a little less certain now? Something to chew on. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.